The spaceship Eos floated silently in the vast darkness of space. Its silver surface shimmered faintly under the light of a distant star. Inside, Captain Lucas Grayson stood on the bridge, staring at the screen before him. The crew was busy at their stations, their faces glowing softly from the lights of their monitors. After months of traveling through uncharted regions of the galaxy, they had finally found something remarkable. "Captain," said Dr. Elena Martinez, her voice filled with excitement. She was leaning over a console, her dark eyes wide with wonder. "You need to see this." Lucas walked over and looked at the data displayed on the screen. It showed readings from a nearby planet, one that had not been mapped before. The atmosphere was breathable, and there were signs of life, complex life, plants, animals, maybe even intelligent beings. For a moment, no one spoke. The discovery felt too big for words. "We've got to check it out," said Lieutenant Ryan Brooks. He was standing near the navigation panel, his arms crossed. His tone was calm, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his blue eyes. "This could be the moment we've all been waiting for." Lucas nodded slowly. "Prepare a landing party. We'll go down and see what's there." He turned to Elena. "Dr. Martinez, you're coming with us. And Brooks, you'll lead security." Then he glanced at Daniel Harper, the ship's engineer. "Harper, bring your tools. If there's anything worth studying, we'll need your expertise." Daniel nodded, though his attention seemed divided. His young daughter, Sophia, was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, drawing pictures on a tablet. At just 8 years old, she was small for her age, with curly brown hair and bright green eyes. Normally, children weren't allowed on missions like this, but Sophia had insisted on coming along. Her mother had passed away 2 years earlier, and Daniel didn't have the heart to leave her behind on Earth. A short time later, the group gathered in the hangar bay. They wore lightweight suits designed for exploration. Sophia stayed close to her father, clutching a small bag of snacks. The airlock hissed open, and they stepped onto the ramp leading to the planet below. The world that greeted them was breathtaking. Rolling fields of purple grass stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with trees that glowed faintly in the sunlight. Strange creatures flitted through the air, their wings shimmering like rainbows. In the distance, strange structures rose from the ground, tall, crystalline towers that seemed to hum with energy. "This place is incredible," Elena whispered, her voice full of awe. She knelt to examine a cluster of glowing plants, carefully taking samples. "I've never seen anything like it." Ryan kept his hand near his weapon, scanning the area for any signs of danger. So far, everything seemed peaceful, but he knew better than to let his guard down. As they moved deeper into the landscape, they began to notice movement among the trees. At first, it was just shadows, fleeting glimpses of shapes darting between the trunks. Then suddenly, they appeared, the inhabitants of this strange world. Tall, insect-like creatures with gleaming exoskeletons emerged from the foliage. Their bodies shimmered in shades of gold and green, and their large, multifaceted eyes reflected the light. For a moment, both sides simply stared at each other. Then one of the creatures raised a limb, making a clicking sound. Another followed suit, and soon the entire group was communicating in a series of rhythmic clicks and gestures. Lucas raised his hand slowly, trying to show he meant no harm. "We come in peace," he said, even though he doubted they understood him. Elena stepped forward, holding up her scanner. "Let's try to learn about them," she suggested. "Maybe we can find a way to communicate." Sophia watched silently, her small hands gripping her father's leg. She wasn't afraid, just curious. But none of them realized how quickly curiosity could turn into something far more dangerous. The air was thick with tension as the humans and the insectoid creatures stood facing each other. The tall, golden beings moved slowly, their clicking sounds filling the silence. Captain Lucas Grayson held his hands up, trying to appear calm and non-threatening. Dr. Elena Martinez stepped forward cautiously, holding her scanner in one hand. She wanted to study them, to learn more about their biology and behavior. One of the insectoids tilted its head, studying the group with its large, multifaceted eyes. It made a series of sharp clicks, then gestured toward Alina's device. She hesitated for a moment before showing it the screen. The creature leaned closer, its movements careful but curious. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might find a way to communicate. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks stayed alert, his fingers resting near the weapon at his side. He didn't trust the situation. The creatures were fascinating, yes, but they were also unpredictable. Every movement they made could mean something harmless or something dangerous. Ryan kept glancing at Sophia, who was standing close to her father, Daniel Harper. The little girl watched the scene unfold with wide eyes, clutching her bag tightly. Daniel noticed her unease and knelt down beside her. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're safe here." But even as he spoke, he glanced nervously at the creatures. He wasn't sure if he believed his own words. Alina continued to interact with the insectoids, pointing to objects around them and repeating simple words like tree and sky. One of the creatures mimicked her gestures, raising a limb toward the glowing towers in the distance. It clicked again, louder this time, and several others responded. They seemed to be discussing something among themselves. Captain Grayson took a step forward, hoping to bridge the gap between the two groups. "We're here to learn," he said, though he knew they likely couldn't understand him. "We don't want to hurt you." For a while, it felt like progress was being made. The insectoids began moving closer, their movements slow but deliberate. Some of them reached out, touching the humans' suits or examining their equipment. Alina smiled, encouraged by their curiosity. Maybe this encounter would lead to something meaningful, perhaps even an alliance. But then, everything changed. One of the larger insectoids approached Sophia. It loomed over her, its exoskeleton gleaming in the sunlight. Sophia froze, staring up at the towering figure. Her grip on her bag tightened, and she took a small step back. The creature bent down, its clicking growing faster and sharper. It reached out with one of its limbs, brushing against her arm. Sophia flinched and let out a startled cry. The sound alarmed the insectoid, and it reacted instinctively. Its limb shot forward, striking Sophia hard enough to knock her off her feet. She fell backward onto the ground, crying out in pain. "Sophia!" Daniel shouted, rushing to her side. He scooped her up into his arms, his face pale with fear. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead where she had hit the ground. Ryan immediately drew his weapon, aiming it at the insectoid that had struck Sophia. "Stay back," he barked, his voice firm and commanding. The rest of the creatures froze, their clicking stopping abruptly. Lucas raised a hand, trying to defuse the situation. "Stand down, Brooks," he ordered. "We don't know what happened yet," but his own heart was racing. Seeing a child hurt triggered a deep primal anger within him. Alina hurried over to Daniel and Sophia, pulling a medical kit from her pack. "Let me see her," she said urgently. She examined the wound carefully, relieved to find it wasn't life-threatening, though it would leave a scar. Sophia sobbed quietly, clinging to her father. The insectoids seemed confused by the humans' reaction. They clicked softly among themselves, their movements uncertain. None of them advanced further, but none of them retreated either. The peaceful atmosphere had vanished, replaced by suspicion and fear. "We need to get her back to the ship," Daniel said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Now." Lucas nodded. "Everyone, move out. Back to the EOs." His tone left no room for argument. The crew quickly gathered their equipment and began retracing their steps, keeping a wary eye on the insectoids. As they walked away, Sophia looked over her shoulder at the creatures, her tears mixing with confusion. She didn't understand why they had hurt her, or if they had meant to at all. But the damage was done. What had started as a hopeful first contact had ended in violence, leaving both sides shaken and unsure of what would come next. Back on the EOs, the mood was heavy. The crew moved quickly, their steps echoing through the metal corridors as they carried Sophia to the medical bay. Dr. Elena Martinez worked with steady hands, cleaning the cut on Sophia's forehead and applying a healing patch. The little girl winced but stayed silent, her green eyes wide with pain and confusion. Daniel Harper stood nearby, his face pale and his fists clenched. He wanted to say something, to do something, but there was nothing he could do except watch. Captain Lucas Grayson paced outside the medical bay, his mind racing. What had happened down there? Had the insectoids meant to hurt Sophia, or had it been an accident? He replayed the moment in his head. The way the creature had reached out, the sudden movement, the cry of pain. It didn't make sense. First contact should have been a moment of hope, not violence. Now, everything felt uncertain. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks leaned against the wall, his weapon still strapped to his side. His jaw was tight, his blue eyes sharp with anger. "We can't trust them," he said finally, breaking the silence. "They attacked a child. That's not something we can ignore." Lucas stopped pacing and turned to him. "We don't know what really happened," he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "It could have been a misunderstanding. Maybe they didn't mean to hurt her." Ryan shook his head. "Doesn't matter. They crossed a line. You saw how fast they reacted when she cried out. They're dangerous, Captain. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Elena stepped out of the medical bay, pulling off her gloves. Her expression was calm but serious. "Sophia will be okay," she said. "The wound isn't deep, and the patch will help it heal quickly. But emotionally, this is going to stay with her." She glanced toward the closed door, her brow furrowed. "And with us too." Daniel emerged a moment later, his face lined with worry. He looked at Lucas and Ryan, then at Elena. "What are we going to do?" he asked quietly. "We can't just let this go unanswered." Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know yet. This wasn't supposed to happen. We came here to explore, to learn, not to start a conflict." But news of the incident had already spread beyond the ship. The EOs had sent a report back to Earth, detailing the discovery of the alien species and the attack on Sophia. Within hours, the story reached every corner of the planet. Images of the insectoids and footage from the landing party's cameras were broadcast across news networks. People watched in shock as they saw the towering creatures surround the humans, and the moment one of them struck Sophia, outrage erupted almost instantly. Parents held their children closer, imagining what it would feel like to see them hurt. Politicians gave fiery speeches, demanding justice. Protesters gathered in city squares, holding signs that read, "Protect our children," and "No mercy for monsters." The message was clear. Humanity would not tolerate harm to its youngest members. General Patricia Monroe stood in a high-tech command center on Earth, watching the reports flood in. Her sharp features were set in a grim expression as she listened to updates from military leaders. "This changes everything," she said, her voice cold and determined. "If these creatures think they can harm one of ours without consequences, they're wrong." Plans began to take shape. Fleets of warships were prepared, armed with weapons designed to dismantle entire civilizations. Scientists worked around the clock to analyze the data sent by the EOs, searching for weaknesses in the insectoids' biology and technology. Diplomacy was abandoned. Humanity had decided it would strike back, and it would strike hard. On the EOs, the crew felt the weight of what was coming. Lucas called a meeting in the briefing room, gathering everyone together. "Earth knows what happened," he said, looking around the table. "They're sending reinforcements. A full-scale assault is being planned." Ryan nodded, his expression grim. "Good. Those things need to pay for what they did." Elena frowned, shaking her head. "We don't even know if they understood what they were doing. What if it was a mistake? Shouldn't we try talking to them again before we jump to war?" "It's too late for that," Lucas replied, his tone heavy with regret. "The decision has been made. All we can do now is follow orders." As the meeting ended, Sophia sat in her quarters, staring at the glowing stars outside her window. Her father had told her they were safe now, but she didn't feel safe. She kept thinking about the creature that had hurt her, the way it had looked at her, the sound it had made. She didn't understand why it had done what it did, and she didn't know that her pain would soon lead to the destruction of an entire species. The human fleet arrived in orbit around the alien planet within days. Massive warships, their surfaces dark and imposing, cast long shadows over the crystalline towers below. Each vessel bristled with weapons designed to destroy entire cities in seconds. General Patricia Monroe's voice crackled over the comm system as she addressed the captains of the fleet. "This is not a negotiation," she said firmly. "We are here to send a message. No one harms a human child and survives." Captain Lucas Grayson stood on the bridge of the Eos, watching the fleet take position. His stomach churned with unease. He had been part of the mission that discovered this world, hoping for peaceful contact. Now, he was leading an assault against it. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on him like a stone. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks moved through the ship, preparing the crew for battle. He checked weapon systems, reviewed tactical plans, and ensured everyone knew their role. His face was hard, his focus sharp. "This isn't just about Sophia anymore," he told the team. "It's about showing every species out there that humanity doesn't back down. Not ever." Dr. Elena Martinez stayed in the lab, her hands trembling as she packed away samples of alien plants and soil. She wanted to believe there was another way, but no one was listening. Her heart ached as she thought about the insectoids, their curiosity, their strange beauty. Were they really monsters? Or were they simply misunderstood? It didn't matter now. War had already begun. On Earth, the mood was electric. Crowds gathered in streets and squares, cheering as news of the fleet's arrival spread. Politicians gave speeches praising the bravery of the soldiers and condemning the insectoids' actions. Some people wept openly, thinking of Sophia and imagining their own children in her place. Others raised fists in anger, shouting for revenge. Humanity had united behind a single cause: justice. The first wave of attacks came at dawn. From high above, missiles streaked through the atmosphere, striking the glowing towers and shattering them into shards of light. Explosions rippled across the landscape, sending plumes of smoke and dust into the air. The insectoids scrambled to respond, deploying swarms of smaller drones that darted toward the ships like angry bees. Their movements were fast, precise, but they were no match for humanity's firepower. From the bridge of the Eos, Lucas watched the destruction unfold. The once beautiful fields of purple grass were now scared by fire and ash. The crystalline structures, which had hummed with life just days before, lay in ruins. He clenched his fists tightly, forcing himself to stay focused. This was war. There was no room for doubt. Ryan led a ground assault alongside squads of soldiers. They landed near one of the larger settlements, where groups of insectoids were gathering. The creatures fought fiercely, using their bioluminescent bodies to confuse and disorient the humans. But the soldiers' advanced weapons tore through their defenses. Bright flashes of energy lit up the battlefield as both sides clashed in brutal combat. Elena stayed aboard the Eos, unable to watch. She buried herself in work, cataloging data and analyzing fragments of alien technology recovered during earlier missions. Her mind kept drifting back to the moment when the insectoids had first approached them. Curious, cautious, almost hopeful. How quickly that hope had turned to ashes. Daniel Harper sat with Sophia in their quarters, holding her close as the ship shook from distant explosions. She had stopped crying but still flinched at every loud noise. "Why are they doing this?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. Daniel hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, he said, "They're trying to protect us, sweetheart, to make sure no one else gets hurt." But Sophia didn't look convinced. She stared at the floor, her small hands clutching her knees. Deep down, she wondered if all this violence was really necessary. As night fell, the human forces pushed deeper into the alien world. Cities burned, forests smoldered, and countless lives were lost. The insectoids fought valiantly, retreating into underground tunnels and launching desperate counterattacks. Yet, despite their efforts, they were losing. Humanity's vengeance was swift, merciless, and overwhelming. In the command center on Earth, General Monroe watched the progress reports with satisfaction. Justice was being served. But somewhere inside her, a faint question lingered. Was this truly justice, or something darker? The battle raged on, and the alien world was crumbling under humanity's assault. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks led his team deeper into the heart of the insectoid's territory. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground was littered with shards of crystal from the shattered towers. The once vibrant landscape now looked like a graveyard, its beauty erased by fire and destruction. Ryan moved cautiously, his weapon ready. His soldiers followed close behind, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. They had been trained for situations like this, but nothing could have prepared them for the eerie sight of the insectoid's underground tunnels. The creatures had retreated below the surface, using the maze-like network to launch surprise attacks. Every corner they turned felt like a trap waiting to spring. As they pushed forward, Ryan spotted movement ahead. A group of insectoids emerged from the shadows, their golden exoskeletons glinting faintly in the dim light. They carried strange devices that emitted low, pulsing hums. Ryan raised his hand, signaling his team to stop. For a moment, both sides stood frozen, staring at each other. Then, without warning, the insectoids charged. Their movements were fast and chaotic, but Ryan's team held their ground. Bright flashes of energy lit up the narrow tunnel as weapons fired from both sides. The sound of explosions echoed through the cavern, shaking the walls and sending rocks tumbling down. Ryan ducked behind a fallen piece of debris, his heart pounding. He glanced at his soldiers, making sure they were still safe. One of the insectoids broke through the chaos, leaping toward Ryan with surprising speed. Before he could react, another soldier shot it down, the creature collapsing in a heap at his feet. Ryan nodded his thanks, but there was no time to rest. More insectoids poured into the tunnel, their clicking growing louder and more frantic. Captain Lucas Grayson watched the battle unfold from the EOS, his face pale. The feed from Ryan's helmet camera showed the brutal reality of what was happening below. Each shot, each explosion, weighed heavily on him. He had wanted to explore, to learn, not to destroy. But now, there was no turning back. Dr. Elena Martinez sat in her lab, listening to the distant rumble of war. She couldn't focus on her work. Her mind kept returning to the first moments of contact, the curiosity in the insectoid's eyes, the way they had tried to communicate. Were they truly monsters, or had humanity misjudged them? She didn't have answers, only questions that gnawed at her conscience. Back in the tunnels, Ryan and his team finally reached their target, a large chamber filled with insectoid elders. These creatures were larger than the others, their exoskeletons etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly. They stood in a circle, their limbs raised as if performing some kind of ritual. When they saw the humans, they stopped and began clicking rapidly. Ryan stepped forward, his weapon aimed at the elders. "We're here to end this," he said, his voice firm. "Tell your people to surrender." To his surprise, one of the elders approached him slowly. It made a series of clicks and gestures, then pointed at Ryan's communicator. Confused, Ryan activated the translation software Elena had developed during their first encounter. After a moment, a broken voice crackled through the device. "No harm intended. Mistake." Ryan frowned, lowering his weapon slightly. "What do you mean, mistake?" The elder clicked again, and the translation came through fragmented but clear. "Child. Accident. Not enemy. Peace. Wanted." Ryan hesitated, his mind racing. Could it be true? Had the attack on Sophia really been an accident? He glanced at his team, seeing uncertainty in their eyes. The insectoids weren't fighting back anymore. They stood silently, watching him with what looked like fear, or maybe hope. Before Ryan could decide what to do, His communicator buzzed with an urgent message from General Monroe. "Brooks, we've received new orders. No survivors. Repeat, no survivors. Finish the mission." Ryan's stomach sank. He looked at the elders, their glowing patterns dimming as if they sensed their fate. For a moment, he thought about disobeying the order. But then he remembered Sophia's tear-streaked face, the anger in Daniel's voice, and the cheers of billions back on Earth. Slowly, he raised his weapon again. The insectoids didn't resist. They stood still, their clicking soft and mournful, as the humans carried out their orders. When it was over, the chamber was silent. Ryan stared at the lifeless bodies, his hands trembling. He had followed orders, but at what cost? As the team returned to the surface, the planet was nearly unrecognizable. Fires burned across the horizon, and the air was thick with ash. Humanity had won, but the victory felt hollow. Somewhere deep inside, Ryan wondered if they had become the very thing they sought to destroy. The war was over. The alien planet lay in ruins, its once glowing towers reduced to jagged shards, and its vibrant fields buried under layers of ash. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks stood on the surface, staring at the devastation. His team had returned to the EOs after completing their mission, but the images of the insectoid elders stayed with him. Their final moments replayed in his mind, their glowing patterns fading, their mournful clicks silenced forever. He told himself it was necessary. It was justice. But deep down, he wasn't so sure. Captain Lucas Grayson called a meeting in the briefing room. The crew gathered quietly, their faces weary and grim. No one spoke as they took their seats. The weight of what they had done hung over them like a storm cloud. Finally, Lucas broke the silence. "Earth has confirmed the operation is complete," he said, his voice flat. "They're calling it a victory." Victory. The word felt wrong. Dr. Elena Martinez sat at the back of the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't look up as Lucas spoke. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on the samples she had collected, the notes she had taken, the fleeting moments of connection before everything fell apart. Now those memories felt like ghosts haunting her. Ryan leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. He had followed orders, just like he was trained to do. But the words of the insectoid elder kept echoing in his mind. No harm intended. Mistake. What if they had been telling the truth? What if humanity had wiped out an entire species for nothing more than a tragic misunderstanding? Daniel Harper sat beside Sophia, who clung to his arm. She hadn't spoken much since returning to the ship, her bright green eyes dimmed by fear and confusion. Daniel tried to comfort her, but he couldn't shake his own guilt. He had brought her along, thinking it would be safe. Now, because of him, she had become the spark that ignited this war. Every time he looked at her, he saw the scars, not just on her forehead, but in her soul. As the meeting ended, Elena approached Lucas. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Do we just leave? Pretend none of this ever happened?" Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. "We report back to Earth. They'll decide what comes next." Elena shook her head. "And what about them?" She gestured toward the view screen, where the smoldering planet loomed in the distance. "Their homes are gone. Their people are dead. Do we even know why they attacked Sophia, or did we just assume the worst?" Lucas didn't have an answer. He turned away, unable to meet her gaze. He had always believed in exploration, in finding new ways to connect with the universe. But now, he wondered if humanity was ready for that responsibility, or if it ever would be. Back on Earth, the news of the victory spread quickly. Politicians praised the soldiers as heroes, and crowds cheered in the streets. General Patricia Monroe addressed the world from a high-tech command center, her sharp features illuminated by flashing lights. "Today, we showed the galaxy that humanity will not tolerate threats against our children," she declared. "This was a message to every species out there. Harm us, and you will face the consequences." But not everyone celebrated. Some people questioned whether the response had been too extreme. Protesters gathered in quiet corners of cities, holding signs that read, "Was it worth it?" and "Justice or Revenge." These voices were small compared to the roar of approval, but they persisted, refusing to let the story end without reflection. On the EOS, preparations began for the journey home. The crew worked in silence, packing the equipment and running system checks. No one laughed or joked anymore. Even Sophia seemed quieter, her usual curiosity dulled by exhaustion and sadness. As the ship lifted off from the alien planet, Ryan stood at a window, watching the surface grow smaller and smaller. Somewhere beneath all that ash and rubble, the remnants of a civilization lay buried. He thought about the Elders' final plea for peace and wondered if anyone on Earth would ever hear their side of the story, or if it would be erased completely, like everything else they had left behind. For now, humanity had won. But as the EOs drifted further into space, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been lost, and that the cost of victory might haunt them all for years to come. Months passed after the EOs returned to Earth. The crew stepped off the ship into a world that had changed while they were gone. News of their mission had spread across the planet, and people lined the streets to cheer for them. Banners hung from buildings with messages like "Heroes of Humanity" and "Protectors of our Future." But beneath the celebrations, cracks were beginning to show. Captain Lucas Grayson stood on a stage at a grand ceremony, his face blank as politicians praised him for his leadership. He didn't feel like a hero. All he could think about was the alien planet, the glowing towers, the fields of purple grass, the insectoids who had once stood tall and proud. Now, it was all gone, destroyed. And for what? A single moment of misunderstanding. Dr. Elena Martinez avoided the spotlight. She spent most of her time in her lab, studying the data she had collected before the war began. Her notes and samples were all that remained of the insectoid species. She worked tirelessly, determined to preserve their memory. Sometimes, late at night, she would stare at the fragments of crystal from their towers, wondering if anyone would ever understand the beauty of what had been lost. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks tried to move on, but sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Elders' glowing patterns fading, heard their mournful clicks. He told himself over and over that he had done his duty, that he had followed orders. But the words felt hollow. One night, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at a photo of Sophia. She wasn't smiling in the picture. Her green eyes looked sad, just like they had on the ship. He wondered if she would ever forgive him, or if he could forgive himself. Daniel Harper struggled too. He had hoped returning home would bring some peace, but guilt followed him everywhere. Sophia tried to act normal, playing with her toys and drawing pictures, but Daniel could see the pain in her eyes. She often asked questions he couldn't answer. "Why did they hurt me?" she would ask. Or, "Did we have to hurt them back?" Daniel wished he knew what to say. General Patricia Monroe became a public figure, giving speeches and appearing on news programs. She spoke confidently about the necessity of the mission, but behind closed doors, she sometimes doubted herself. Late at night, she would sit in her office, staring at reports and images of the destroyed planet. Was this truly justice, or had humanity acted out of fear and anger? She pushed the thoughts away, reminding herself that she had done what was needed to protect her people. Meanwhile, protests continued in small pockets around the world. Some scientists argued that the insectoids might have been trying to communicate, not attack. Others pointed out that humanity had reacted too quickly, without fully understanding the situation. These voices were drowned out by the majority, but they refused to go silent. Elena decided to dedicate her life to uncovering the truth. She wrote papers, gave lectures, and shared everything she had learned about the insectoids. She described their bioluminescent bodies, their intricate clicking language, their towering crystalline cities. She hoped that by keeping their memory alive, she could prevent something like this from happening again. As the years went by, the story of the insectoids faded from the headlines. People moved on, focusing on new discoveries and challenges. But for those who had been part of the mission, the scars remained. Sophia grew older, her curly brown hair longer and her green eyes sharper. She often visited museums, looking at exhibits about space exploration and alien life. One day, she stopped in front of a display featuring a shard of crystal from the insectoid's towers. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "I'm sorry." Back at the space agency, plans were already underway for new missions. Humanity's reach into the stars was growing, and with it came new hopes and new fears. Captain Grayson watched as younger crews prepared for their journeys. He wanted to warn them, to tell them to tread carefully. But he knew they wouldn't listen. They never did. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and dangers alike. Humanity had taken its first steps into the unknown, but it carried with it the lessons of its past, lessons written in fire and ash. Whether it would learn from them remained to be seen. Years had passed since the war on the alien planet. Humanity continued to explore the stars, sending ships farther and farther into the galaxy. New worlds were discovered, new species encountered. But the memory of the insectoids lingered like a shadow, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been done. In the heart of Earth's capital city, a monument was erected in Sophia Harper's honor. It stood tall in a park filled with trees and flowers, its surface smooth and white. At its base was an inscription, "For Sophia, whose courage reminded us to protect our children." People came to visit the monument, laying flowers or simply standing quietly in reflection. Few remembered the details of the war anymore, but everyone knew her name. Sophia herself visited the monument often. Now a teenager, she had grown into a thoughtful young woman with a sharp mind and a kind heart. She studied history and science, hoping to understand the universe better than those who had come before her. Sometimes, she would sit on a bench near the monument, sketching the stars in a notebook. Her father, Daniel, joined her occasionally, though he rarely spoke about the past. They both carried it with them, silently, always. Dr. Elena Martinez became a respected figure in the scientific community. Her work on the insectoids inspired others to think more carefully about first contact. She traveled the world, giving talks and writing books about the importance of understanding before acting. Her message was simple: curiosity should lead to connection, not conflict. Though some dismissed her as idealistic, many listened and learned. Captain Lucas Grayson retired from active duty. He moved to a quiet cabin by the sea, where he spent his days reading and writing. His memoirs told the story of the mission, not as a tale of heroism, but as a cautionary one. He wrote about the beauty of the alien world, the tragedy of its destruction, and the weight of decisions made in anger. His words reached people across generations, sparking debates about humanity's place in the galaxy. Lieutenant Ryan Brooks stayed in the military, rising through the ranks. He trained new recruits, teaching them how to handle weapons, but also how to think critically and act with restraint. He never forgot the elders' final plea for peace, and he made sure his soldiers understood that not every threat was what it seemed. On quiet nights, he still thought about the insectoids, wondering if they might have become allies instead of enemies. General Patricia Monroe stepped down from her position after decades of service. In her later years, she reflected on the choices she had made. She didn't regret protecting humanity, but she wondered if there had been another way. Her speeches shifted over time, focusing less on strength and more on wisdom. "We must be brave," she said in her final address, "but bravery without compassion is no virtue." As humanity reached deeper into space, the lessons of the past shaped its future. Some missions ended in friendship, others in caution. Mistakes were still made, but they were met with reflection rather than revenge. The galaxy remained vast and mysterious, full of wonders waiting to be discovered and dangers waiting to be understood. One day, Sophia stood at the edge of a launch pad, watching a new ship prepare for its journey. Its surface gleamed under the sun, its engines humming softly. She felt a mix of excitement and sadness. The stars called to her, promising adventure and knowledge. But they also reminded her of the cost of ignorance and haste. As the ship lifted off, Sophia whispered something only she could hear. "We can do better," she said. "We have to." The vessel disappeared into the sky, carrying with it the hopes of a species determined to learn from its mistakes. Humanity's path among the stars was far from perfect, but it was moving forward, one step at a time. And somewhere, in the silence of space, the echoes of the insectoid's clicks faded, replaced by the quiet promise of a brighter future.